Hi there and welcome to Diagonal Move. My name's Neil and this video is a review of Space Vermin from Beyond, the second in the Invaders from Dimension X trilogy, coming after Invaders itself and before Attack of the 50-Foot Colossi. It's a series of solo games which are set in the far future, or in a alternative future in which the 124th Galactic Marine Battalion, which are these blue counters, are facing a variety of different aliens that all do different things and move in different alien ways. This is the second game and it builds on the systems that were in the original game. I won't go into too much detail about what those different systems are because I've done a couple of videos recently playing through the two scenarios that are in Space Vermin, but suffice to say that the game is entirely independent. It can be played on its own. There is no need to own any of the other games in the series. So how does Space Vermin from Beyond work? What do you do in a game of Space Vermin Beyond? Well, really what you're going to be doing is you're going to be controlling these Marines, these blue counters here, which come in different types. There are HQ units, heavy weapons, regular Marine squads, a mad scientist, and artillery weapons. Usual kind of thing you'd find in a hex encounter war game. But you'll be facing off against these aliens here who are called the Vermites, and there are different types of Vermites. There are drones and soldiers, ultramites, and then queens, and they are very much like that's the queen there, and they are very much like ants, and they act quite like ants, and you'll follow a procedure each turn to move the ants around the board, fight combat with them, bring in reinforcements and so on. And depending on which scenario you're playing, the procedure is slightly different or somewhat different. And you have scenario 1 follows the track at the top, or the order at the top, and then scenario 2 at the bottom. And that gives these scenarios quite a different feel, but broadly speaking, the way a turn works is you'll take one of these event chits, and all three of the games in this series are event driven or event chit driven, and this is no exception. You'll draw out the token. Depending on which scenario you're playing, you'll either follow the little arrows on the left hand side or the arrow on the right hand side, and that will set the movement direction, or the preferred direction, which is a number which correlates to this compass here. You'll then move the creatures in a set order based on their type and their number. Each unit has a number as well as a type. So of these two drones, you'd move the 6 before you move the 22, and then you would move through the types, so drones first, then ultramites, then soldiers, and finally, depending on the scenario, the queen. When you do that movement though, the tendency will be for them to go in the direction that was set by that event chit. When you follow the preferred direction, you move in the direction set until you hit a scent marker, and then you start moving along the scent marker. And depending on the scenario, those scent markers either converge towards the middle or they move to one side of the map, depending on the scenario. You'll then combat. Combat is very simple. Start with this one. Each of the aliens has a series of symbols on them. You'd have the movement value, defensive value, and the attacking value. The two combat factors at the bottom, in yellow there and in the 3, they are simply numbers of dice. So you roll 3 dice and an attack when you're attacking, and in defense the enemy has to roll 3 or more to cause a hit. A certain number of hits first disrupts the unit and then eliminates the unit. Following on from that, you do reinforcements, and then you have the Marines' turn, and the Marines will first rule out any danger of infection. When the ants are eliminated, they do spread parasites, and there's a risk that your Marines will end up being infected and eventually killed by those parasites. You do your marine actions, and again we have different types of marines, as I think I mentioned before. We have heavy weapons, special ops, HQs, and so on. And depending on the type unit, you can do different things. Broadly speaking, it's move, shoot, move and shoot, or something along the lines of call in reinforcements, or do a recon action, which allows you to see into the future with those event chits a little bit. Once all that's done, you move back to the next alien turn, and you keep going until either you have won the scenario or you have lost the scenario. Let's have a look at the components. Now you get, as you might expect, you get a rulebook, and this is the print and play copy of the game, so a little bit tricky for me to give a full reflection of the components in this review because it's print and play, but give you a sense of what's inside the game and how things would look retail. But bear in mind, this is print and play rather than retail. So we get a rulebook. We get a player aid card with a number of nice tables on. These tables are pretty clear. They detail most of the things you need to know, but as is often the case, the one thing you need at a certain time you may have to hunt through the rulebook for. But I guess there's only a certain amount of space on the player aid, and this is a small folio game, as they're known. So this is a pretty good thing. Obviously, the retail version would have proper colour background or a full colour background and what have you, rather than this low ink version I've got here. Equally, we have a second play aid here, which is the event chit descriptions. Again, low ink version here, and the game is very event driven, and each of these events adds a real quirk to the game, and in fact in this particular game, a quirk to the scenario as well. So, but that's pretty good. It's useful. It's pretty clear. And again, not sure if this is my print and play thing, but the text is a little bit small, but that might be because it has to cram onto just the one page. We also have a map. Now the map is very nice. I've had this map printed actually at the print shop. This is A3 size, and it's more or less the same size as you get in the retail version. The English sizes we have here tend to be slightly thinner and longer than the US sizes, but broadly speaking, it's the same size. Everything on here is very clear. You do have the more tables down the side, and it's just a nice thematic map showing you everything you need to know to play the game, really, and lots of fun little elements. There's a very clear terrain chart down here, and all the different types of terrain are very easy to see, and is of course double-sided, and this is where you can see those scent markers starting to move towards the other side of the map versus in towards the centre, and then you do have the different entry points here as well. Again, another very nice map, same colours and everything as the other side, of course, but very, very nicely done map that certainly adds a splash of colour to the game overall. We have various counters in different varieties. There are the unit types. The Marines are blue on both sides, with the disrupted and undisrupted side largely indicated by the little red number there, and the drones of the Vermites we have disrupted on that side is a slightly darker colour than the more orangey colour on here. The combat factors and so on are very easy to read. They make perfect sense when you look at them. There's no tiny little superscript or anything like that, with the one exception there of that little P, which shows that they're wearing a pistol rather than their regular weapon due to being disrupted. The counters are again another thing that I can't quite give you a full reflection of in terms of the the actual retail copy. But what I do have is I have a counter from another game. This is a retail version of a different Tiny Battle game, and you can see that the size is broadly the same, reasonably thick compared to my 2 bits of paper stuck together kind of version. And they do have that very kind of if you play folio games, you'll be familiar with the type of counter you get in here. Not quite as thick as a deluxe copy from a big box game, but not paper like my print and play version. In terms of the box, what I think of it, they don't come in a box. They instead come in one of these bags. The game that we had there was Sticks and Stones, which is a different Tiny Battle game, but just so you know, it's a boxed. It's not a boxed game. It is a folio game. Moving on to the rulebook. Again, the usual caveat that I mentioned before about this being print and play rather than retail, but it does at least give you a sense of what the rulebook looks like and how it's laid out. 2 columns. There is colour, nice large print, or at least readable print. You have the sequence of play at the beginning there, and then the different phases of the game as you go through. Lots of colour images and examples, which is very nice, and it really helps with learning the rules for the Vermite movement, because there are different movement rules essentially depending on the scenario. So scenario 1 has these tunnels, that's in this example here, but scenario 2 has a completely different movement involving how the queen moves. Examples of combat and reinforcements before moving on to the Marines. With this particular game, as is often the game, there are the odd thing in the rulebook that I think I mentioned before. You just wish it was printed out somewhere else. For example, the landing zone procedure is in the rulebook, and the landing zone procedure, there's a few different things that happen, but it's only in the rulebook and not anywhere else, which kind of is crying out for an additional note somewhere. But sadly, this is well, not sadly, but this is a folio game, meaning there's going to be a limited amount of space inside those bags for extras like multiple player aids. There is a few other things to bear in mind. There's a discrepancy between the pants gun on the rulebook versus what's in the player aid. It's the result is jolted versus scattered, but I think they do basically the same thing. Just a typo there. There is a 2-player option, but if we're honest, this really is a dedicated solo game. And again, moving on to terrain, different types of terrain unique to each map, which again I wish was printed somewhere. I mean, they do the best they can, I think, here, but on the map. But there's just elements which it would just make it a bit easier to learn the game if you had these reminders on a separate piece of paper. And I think there's sufficient reminders in the rulebook that could have made another player aid card, or maybe even the reverse of the one we have. For example, this terrain reminder box here, would have loved to have had that on a separate sheet. Then moving to the scenarios, there are 2 scenarios. The Family Jewels, which is a pick up and deliver type scenario, while surrounded by oncoming aliens. So it's almost a siege with a pick up and deliver element, which is quite interesting. It's quite a challenge as well, with different units and different movement and so on versus the other scenario, and it's very definitely an interesting scenario, that one. And then we have scenario 2, which is the one on the board underneath here at the moment, where you simply have to prevent the Vermites getting off the map. So it's a simpler scenario, no less challenging, but definitely simpler. And then at the back there is a campaign game where you string the two scenarios together. Hopefully that quick overview and look through the components has given you a sense of the sort of game Space Vermin is. It's a game much like the other two in the series, Invaders and 50-Foot Colossi. It's a game which has a lot of randomness, a lot of deliberately chaotic elements. The movement of the drone tokens is random. You roll 3 dice and move to the hex number. The reinforcement procedure, depending which one you choose, is a very similar thing where you roll a die and you may or you may not land as you wished. Combat is dice. The special weapons of the Mad Scientist, which I don't recall whether I mentioned them before, but these have the Mad Scientist has a series of weapons he can use, but they're drawn at random and they have slightly and really quite chaotic effects. And if you don't like randomness in a game, that may be something to consider when you do pick up Space Vermin, or indeed either of the other two games. But what it does do is it adds a tremendous amount of fun. You never know whether your special ops guy is going to land where it wants to land, or whether he's going to move somewhere else. The drone, may land on his head. You may have the best defensive position in the world around this bridge, and then an event infects everybody with parasites. And that idea here of these parasite markers, whenever an alien is destroyed or eliminated, of potentially infecting Marines around him, is really clever. It's really good, and adds to that tension and that element of fun. I just kind of wish the two sides, the tainted, which is the slightly less bad side, and the infected, were slightly easier to see. But on the whole, it's not too bad. But the controlled chaos is a deliberate design feature of this game. The original Space Invaders from Dimension X was entirely random, and this is a development of that. The adventures are fun, lots of fun, crazy things. The parasites come out of the tar pits. The queen burps. Random other stuff happens. The vermites will suddenly decide to molt and lose half their strength. All real crazy stuff. But this time modified by these pathways, so you have a sense of what's going to happen. Which makes things a little bit more controllable than Invaders, but not by much. It also adds for a ton of variety. You never quite know how the game's going to turn out, at least in the experience that I've had with it. The two scenarios do feel quite different, although it's the same core rules. The marine rules, the player rules, if you like, are the same in both scenarios, but the activation is different for the vermites, and that activation, although it's a subtle difference, just the queens move and the queens don't move, and the other soldiers move through tunnels and things like that. Despite the similarity, it feels very different. And this is a stop the onslaught kind of scenario. The scenario over here feels much more like you've got an objective. It feels much more challenging in many ways because of that additional objective, this scenario, and that's a good thing. Having two quite different scenarios is really good. It adds something to the game. It's a nice variety on top of the variety you have already due to the chaotic elements. A few things to comment on, which perhaps I'm less enthusiastic about. The two sides, disrupted and undisrupted, which are actually the wrong way around there. It's undisrupted and disrupted. The colours are very similar, and that includes for the Marines. when the maps get busy, and they do get quite busy, it's quite difficult to see which ones are disrupted, which ones are undisrupted. And in this particular entry in the series, more so than the others, when you have lots of these units on the board, it's quite difficult to see or to quickly locate which unit is next. I mean, there is a table here. So the process would typically go drones, ultramites, soldiers, queens, and you've got the numbers. But when you've got all these counters on the board, I'm just chucking a few on here for a demonstration, finding a specific one and not knowing whether it's on the board or in the cup is a bit fiddly, to be honest, particularly when there's lots of counters on the board. But that's not to detract from the fact that the AI system is very clever. It's a very nice development from the previous game, but it does add some complexity that isn't in the other game, or even in the later game, 50 Foot Colossi. The movement takes a little bit of getting used to how that works. Combat is very simple. Roll some dice, apply the effects. It's simple, it's fun. There's nothing too drastic about that. So overall then, my overall thoughts are this is another tremendously fun entry in what is a tremendously fun series. It's a game that I will come back to over and over again. The scenarios are challenging enough to want to try and beat them again. They're also different enough to want to play the two separately rather than picking your favourite, which may happen in other scenario-based games. And so I would recommend this. I would recommend this to anyone who is interested in something fun, something lighter than the typical hex and counter game. I would say this is probably the more complex of the three games due to the movement and the differences between the two scenarios. But that's not to say it's a particularly complex game per se, just that if you're totally new to wargaming, you may want to get one of the other two first, because of the mild increase in complexity. But if you've played war games before, you'll be absolutely fine picking this up, no problem. Okay, that's the end of this review. Please like, subscribe, comment in the comments, and hopefully I'll see you next time.